What is up, everybody? Welcome. Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 474. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and our recording software did not work properly this week, so I had to hand the keys over to Luis in where are you at, Colorado or whatever, and you found buttons that I didn't even know existed on this software. Oh my God.
Marshall's been holding on to me the whole time. There's been a soundboard this entire time, and you never used it.
I feel like this is not going to end well for me. Okay. It's like, if you could say, hey, what if you did the show, but you just gave Luis access to a soundboard, but you don't get one? I was like, no. And yet, here I am. All right. We're going to be doing a show this week about Ravnica Allegiance mechanics. We've got a preview card. And we're going to be doing the rules and mechanics show. So basically the idea behind this is new set reviews next week, and we want to get you set up as well as possible. When we hit the set review, we like to hit the set review running, where we can cover every single card with just as much depth as we need to, and then move on to the next one. And that means not taking the time to explain every rules mechanic on every card. And because it takes a while, right? We want you to feel comfortable and confident when you go into your pre-release, not just with the cards, but also the rules and the mechanics, so you know the little loopholes and the little things that it does do and it doesn't do. And you're not one of those people at the pre-release picking up the card and going, what does this do? And not understanding it and playing it wrong. That's not going to be you. And this show is part of the reason why.
Oh, that was a good stopping.
Oh, my God.
I sort of put punctuation on it.
Yeah, your comedic timing is... Okay. And...
Well, I do think it's worth mentioning. This isn't soundboard related.
I can't believe I can't fire back with this soundboard right now.
That by going over the mechanics, it also gives us and the listeners a time to kind of evaluate the new cards as they come out, because we're still getting spoilers, and try to figure out kind of what the play patterns that they might fit into. Like, not every guild plays like its mechanic suggests. Look at Golgari, but a lot of them do. Mm-hmm. And when I take a look at, like, Spectacle for Rakdos, which we'll get into, it's like, yeah, that's going to inform a lot of which cards are good in the guild. So I think it's really valuable to take a look at the mechanics.
And we're going to do that too. Not just the mechanics themselves, but we're also going to take just a brief look at what each guild is trying to do and what our take on it is early. So we always have some assumptions going into the set review. We try not to stick to them too much because they tend to change after we get our hands on the actual set. But, it's reasonable to have a baseline going in and go, okay, this is an aggressive guild, or this is a controlling guild, and then try to build off of that. And we're going to give you those impressions of each guild as well. We usually don't. Luis, do you have any interest in telling people what guild they should play at the pre-release? They always ask us. They always ask. They want to know.
Well, this dovetails into our sponsor nicely, but Paulo Vitor Damarosa always writes a which guild should you play at the pre-release article on Channel Fireball, and he does a very good job. He breaks down all the different reasons you'd play each guild. In general, though, because it's a pre-release, and I think that the most important thing is to have fun, I would pick the guild that sounds like the most fun for you. I think that's generally how I tend to choose them, and, what I would advise. But for people who want to win more, Paulo's article is going to be a better answer than what we would give you.
There you go. And while you're there, on channelfireball.com, you can pre-order Ravnica Allegiance right now. All of the spoiled cards are up. Plus, you can, pre-order your box or whatever so that you can have a draft with your friends. And while you're there, check out the article from Paulo. I mean, I like to min-max stuff as well, but I do find min-maxing the pre-release to be like, I don't know. I don't want to go in there with that mindset. I have that mindset for basically every event that I play for the whole entire rest of the set, every draft I do, outside of goofy stuff on stream or whatever. And, I really just want to I just want to pick up a guild and just try it out. And I just don't really care. Like, I'm going to do the pre-release this weekend with our friends from Loading Ready Run. And I don't even know what guild I'm doing. I'm just going to take whatever's left. Like obviously I love Simic. That's my favorite, but whatever. If other people want it, I'll take anything. So I think that's the good attitude to have for it as well. Okay. So yes, Channel Fireball, make sure you check that out and you can do your pre-orders. Also, the show is brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's the place where you can go to support the show directly, and you get access to some cool stuff. The Patreon feed has some extra tidbits in there depending on what level, and you you can win a playmat, and we've got one here. This one is from PT Atlanta, and this one goes to James Gardner from Herndon, Virginia. Thank you so much, James, for your support of the show. I got a big pile of playmats to send out. I got a label maker, Luis, like a label printer. Are you stoked or what?
Yeah, that is pretty exciting for some people.
Yeah, and I unfortunately am one of them. But anyway, it means I can print out posters and stuff from here, which is actually just super handy. So thank you, James, for that. And I'll get that sent out to you. Let's get into it. Right into the business here. Mechanics, rules, first look at the guilds, etc. So, big picture stuff. Ravnica Allegiance is the 80th expansion for Magic the Gathering. It comes out on January 25th, 2019. Officially speaking, it's not part of a block. They've kind of broken up the sets like that, but it really is. It's part of a 3 series of sets that are all related to each other. Guilds of Ravnica before, and then this one, and then the next one we don't know the name of. I think the code name is Milk. But we don't know what's going to happen on this. But this one is the other 5 guilds. So in Guilds of Ravnica, we had 5 guilds, and here is the other half of the guilds. They're blue-white Azorius, black-red Rakdos, green-red Gruul, black-white Orzhov, and blue-green Simic. And like Guilds of Ravnica, each will have its own signature mechanic. Also, they tend to have a certain style to them, and that's going to come out as well. So let's get into the mechanics. This is the meat of the show right here. The first one up is Rakdos, and you mentioned it a minute ago, Luis, that is Spectacle. So Spectacle offers an alternate casting cost that you can only access if your opponent has lost life this turn. It doesn't matter how much life they lost, just that they have. So all the Spectacle cards have a normal mana cost that you can just pay and play them. But if your opponent has lost life this turn due to any reason, themselves or you inflicting it, combat damage, whatever, then you can pay the Spectacle cost. And this is actually really cool. The Spectacle cost is sometimes more expensive and sometimes cheaper. So
right.
Yeah, cheaper makes sense, right? That is just what I assume Spectacle would be. Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, if you hit them, then your things become cheaper. But the more expensive ones have like cool effects that only happen when you pay the Spectacle cost.
Right. And that is some kind of cool design space. So you can, loss of life, by the way, is just when their life total goes down. So combat, burn spells, incidental life loss, or damage from cards that say like do 1 damage to your opponent or whatever. Self-inflicted life loss from the opponent's cards, tap it pings them or whatever. They take a damage, then it'll turn on your Spectacle card. So don't only think of combat. I think the temptation is to think, okay, I'll attack with all my things, get Spectacle, and then cast my Spectacle card. There are other ways to do it. Also,
yeah, I'd expect to see a lot of the similar kind of enablers to Bloodthirst. That was the previous mechanic from many sets ago. A couple different sets actually had it, where if your opponent was damaged, then the creature comes in with like some ++1 counters. And you're going to see a lot of the same enablers. And it is interesting which Spectacle cards really want to be cast pre-combat, like Skewer the Critics. This is a 2 and a red for deal 3, or you can pay red. Spectacle is just a single red for deal 3. So here, right, it's really valuable if you can hit your opponent before combat, then you can cast this for 1 mana to remove a blocker. Like that gets a lot more effective than if you were to cast it post-combat. Right.
What's the rarity on that?
I think that's a common, actually.
I might make that the background for the video version of the set review. But yeah, a couple of little notes. You can always choose if you'd like to pay the Spectacle cost once it's been enabled. If your opponent lost life this turn, you can also still just pay the regular cost.
Right, for some of the more expensive, the ones that have a more expensive Spectacle cost, you might not want that.
Right, you might want to play 2 spells instead or something along those lines. Also, just to be clear, Spectacle doesn't change when you can cast a spell. If it's a creature, you can still only cast it on one of your main phases, for example. Sometimes people think that abilities are different, like they're giving you permission to cast it at a different time, but it's not. You still can only cast it whenever you could cast it normally. It's just a different cost. Also, I don't know how much this will come into play, but even if you do cast a spell for its Spectacle cost, the spell's mana cost and converted mana cost don't change. It's still the thing in the upper right corner, not what you paid on Spectacle. Though I don't believe I've seen any cards yet that actually care about that. But if that is a thing, look to the upper right corner of your card to see the card's converted mana cost, when you cast it or whatever.
Right, like if you get mana drained or something like that.
Mana drained. There you go. Interestingly, some spectacle cards reduce the cost of a spell's reward, as I mentioned, and some of them make it more expensive. So keep your eye out for that. I think that those are going to play very differently from each other. It's just a completely different take on the spectacle mechanic. So that's something that you're going to want to really keep an eye on, whether it's more expensive and a bonus or whether it's just cheaper. Okay, let's go into the next one. We'll kind of cruise through these and then we'll give our takes on the guilds a little bit more broad after that. Next is Orzhov, which I refuse to say Orzhov, even though they do in the video for this. Afterlife is the mechanic.
Orzhov, though. It cannot possibly be Orzhov.
Well, remember when Zach used to say it and we made fun of him? I think he might have just been right.
No, that's not how language works.
We're not going to do that. Okay. So Orzhov is...
I believe in populist rule.
Look, I'm with you on this one. It's just everybody says Orzhov, and that's fine by me. Although, what is...
Kalitas does not fly here. Let's just put it that way. It's
well, he doesn't have flying. But what is the H doing there, though? Like, you really... That's going to keep you up at night, I think. All right, so Afterlife is Orzhov's mechanic. Afterlife is a triggered ability that triggers when the creature with Afterlife dies. If the creature has Afterlife, you just check the number, because every creature that has it says Afterlife 1 or Afterlife 2, and you just check that whatever that number is, and that's how many 1/1 flying black and white spirit tokens you get when that creature dies. So it's really simple. I think Afterlife is the simplest of all the mechanics. Just as a refresher, die is a shortcut word in Magic that means the creature goes from the battlefield to the graveyard, meaning that effects that exile the creature will prevent Afterlife from triggering. This is
for balance or whatever.
Right. That's kind of it, right? It's just, all right. So you get guys. Now, this is powerful, and we'll talk about it, after we go over the mechanics. I mean, 1/1 flyers are no joke, but I don't know. Like, to me, this is just like, that's it. That's Afterlife. There's really not much to say about it as far as mechanically speaking goes.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very strong mechanic and it's very easy to use. I think just about all the Afterlife cards I've seen are just like, yep, I'd put this card in my deck.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that's what I think too. Simic is next. That's blue-green. Adapt is the keyword here. It's a new keyword action, and it will have a number associated with it. So adapt 1, adapt 2. You'll pay some cost. It usually, at least from what I've seen, is just mana. And then you check to see if the creature has any +1/+1 counters on it already. If it does, nothing happens.
You are allowed to activate it if you'd like.
You can. If it does not have any +1/+1 counters on it, you will get as many +1/+1 counters on it as its adapt number. So it has the ability to grow. It's very simple when you think of it that way, and you can't do it multiple times. That's kind of the idea here, is that if you adapt and it has the counter on it, you will not be able to adapt again for any meaningful effect. But if the counter goes away, you can do it again. So it lets you, if it gets moved or removed or whatever, then you can do it again. It's pretty simple mechanic all told. But there's a few things. First, you want to find ways to move the counters or cash them in for value. That's kind of the thing that I'm going to be looking for on this set. And then if a creature loses all of its +1/+1 counters, it can adapt again, like I said. And then, there's also, I've seen one, what's her name? Zagana. There's a new version of Zagana.
Yeah.
And, she gives all your creatures with +1/+1 counters on them something. I can't remember, a trample, or they get bigger or whatever. But the point is that she's a reward for having creatures with +1/+1 counters on them. And of course, adapt, does that built in. So I'm looking for payoffs or big adapt numbers. And it looks pretty straightforward though. I mean, it's just, the main thing to know is that you can't just keep doing it over and over and keep piling up cards.
Yeah, and I think that this is going to be one of the trickier mechanics, not because the mechanic itself is tricky, but because Simic, living up to its kind of theme, is going to have a lot of ways to remove counters or move counters around, or get extra value out of either getting to adapt over and over again, or there's a bunch of adapt creatures that say when a counter is placed on this, do something cool like tap a creature or give a creature flying or whatever. Mm-hmm. You're going to get to trigger these things multiple times by putting counters on them through whatever means you need.
Yeah. Okay. 2 more to go. Gruul is Riot. And this looks really strong to me. Riot's a new keyword that gives you a choice when you cast a creature with Riot. You can either put a +1/+1 counter on it, or you can give it haste. Those are the two choices you have with all creatures with Riot. You choose before the creature enters a battlefield. So it will either enter with the counter or with haste, meaning that if, like, for example, the counter makes it big enough to dodge a burn spell where its base power and toughness is not, it will enter with the counter already on it, and your opponent will not have a window to kill your creature with their burn spell. This is important, right? This comes up occasionally in limited. You will already have the counter on it. It also will already have haste, although that probably isn't as relevant. A little note about the haste, by the way, is that it's not haste until end of turn. The creature just has haste as an ability that will stay on it. So this will really come up rarely. This isn't something that you need to really worry yourself with, because haste is basically only relevant for that first turn anyway. But, if there's some way that somebody can steal your creature that doesn't automatically give it haste, it does actually still have haste, even though it won't say it on there. And again, I don't expect that to really come up, but it's just a corner case thing that.
Also, some creatures have multiple instances of Riot, or you have cards that give your creatures Riot. And I would suggest not picking haste more than once, but you can get as many +1/+1 counters as you have instances of Riot.
That's right. And or you can pick 2 +1/+1 counters, or if you have 2 Riots, or you can do 1 and a haste, like you said. I guess, there could be a scenario where you actually want a smaller creature for some reason, or you would pick haste twice, but that is probably going to be very rare. But, corner cases, etc. Last one is Azorius. Addendum is the name of their ability word. Now, this is an ability word, by the way, which is different from what we were talking about with keywords. Ability words are more like reminder. These are the ones that are in italics and have like an M- after them, and then they tell you something. And what that means is it doesn't have any actual rules implications itself. Like Addendum doesn't change anything itself. It's a reminder that says, if you've met some criteria, then this spell is different. Like if you remember Landfall, right? Like, I think Landfall was one of these. But anyway, Addendum, the thing that you're trying to meet is if you've cast the spell during your main phase or not, which makes you think, well, these are probably instants or flashcards or whatever, which they are. But you're going to have to read each Addendum card carefully to figure out what the difference is between casting it on your main phase or not, because every single one of them is different. There's no, this isn't the type of mechanic that has like name and a number after it, and you can just repeat it based on whatever that is. This is, if you've done this thing, then you get something extra. And in this case, that thing is casting the spell on your main phase. So look, you're giving up flexibility, right? Everybody knows you like to wait till your opponent's turn to cast instants in many cases. And in this case, you're saying, I'm not going to do that, but they're rewarding you for it.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember we got a tweet, someone saying like, "Man, this feels like instants with drawbacks," and it's like, no, they're actually instants with upside. They're instants, but if you pay the cost of casting them, slowly during your main phase, you get a 2 life or an extra card, or to play a card from your hand, or whatever the special bonus is. But it is kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a simple mechanic, right? Like not one that, is super difficult to understand. The one thing that does stand out to me a little bit is that it is, maybe this is just Azorius flavor, it's making me do something I don't naturally want to do, right? It's paying me for it, but it's like, I don't want to play my instance on my turn. Like that's not.
Some of them will feel a lot better than others. There's a couple things that are going on. One is, like, for example, this card we have here, Sphinx's Insight. It's 2 white, blue. It's an instant. Draws 2 cards. Then the addendum is if you played it during your main phase, you gain 2 life. There's going to be a lot of games where you just have 4 mana, you have this, and you have no other instance in your hand. So, of course, you'd rather just play it main phase and get 2 life. That's not even a question. There's also, one of the other commons we've seen is 2 and a blue, instant return target creature to owner's hand. And the addendum is if you played it during your main phase, draw a card.
Ooh, that's a big difference.
That's just such a big difference. That's, the difference between drawing card and not is so big that you're going to play this main phase like 80% of the time and be very happy about it.
By the way, I love the strategic implications for cards like that. You know, like your opponent passes, like, would they really give up the card here? You know, that kind of thing is pretty cool. Small note on the rules. Each card with addendum will happen in the order it's written on the card if the addendum is relevant. So like in Sphinx's Insights case, you'll draw the 2 cards and then gain the 2 life, although this, of course, happens kind of all at once. But it does happen in order, technically speaking. And if you see the word instead, which apparently is on a card, although this was referenced in the rules article I read, but I don't know the card, it will replace the effect rather than augmenting it. So, you know, addendum might say like gain 2 life, instead gain 4, right? You don't get both. That's what it's saying. It's you're doing the new thing, obviously, which is perhaps obvious, but just worth mentioning. And then again, the kind of takeaway is make sure you read each one individually. If I tell you that the card has addendum, it doesn't mean anything. All it means is I'll get something extra for doing it in my main phase, but I don't know what that is until I've actually read the card. So each time you look at an addendum card or you're going to put it in your deck, really take a look at it, because they have kind of free reign to design these however they want. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that addendum is going to, because it's an ability word, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen, it's the one who's going to vary the most from card to card, because they could literally just be doing anything.
Yes, exactly. And I think that makes it interesting, but also like there's no shortcut here, right? With Afterlife, it's like, okay, I get it. All I really need to know is if it has it and what the number is. And then I understand it, right? I don't need to know anything else here. We're really going to need to go deep. And we will, of course, during the set review as well. So fret not. A couple of housekeeping things here. Split cards are back. They looks like the same type of setup that they had in Guilds of Ravnica, where the first half of it is like a cheaper hybrid card and the second half is a more expensive guild specific card. So I think that we're just going to see a similar cycle to the one that we saw in Guilds. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. Hybrid mana is back as well on, regular cards just on their own, same as this Guilds of Ravnica. So there you go. Let's take a look at each guild now. So we read the mechanic, and I've got a few, like an example card from each one. And then we can kind of give our take on, well, what do we think these things are actually going to be doing? Does this look really powerful? Is this easy to take advantage, or does it have a high setup cost, etc.? So Rakdos, not surprisingly, is looking to be aggressive. There are many ways for the opponent to lose life. But you mentioned this earlier. Traditionally, some of them have been cheap, like 1 mana creatures or effects that have an evasion or a ping ability to get Spectacle going. And this was true with Bloodthirst, as you mentioned before. Remember, there was the 1 red, the Fire Slinger, or whatever the thing was called, and it just tapped to ping opponents. It was a 1/1 for 1. And it also, going back in time, there was a black for a 1/1 unblockable that maybe couldn't block, but I can't remember. But anyway, these were cheap ways on turn 1 to make sure that you were basically getting, in this case, Spectacle every single turn. And those type of cards tend to overperform based on how they look. When you see them, you're like, this card doesn't, it's a 1/1. It doesn't really do anything. But they actually do tend to work well for decks like this that want to turn on Spectacle, routinely.
Yeah, and even though Spectacle could be, the mechanic could end up on a lot of different kinds of cards, given what we've seen and what I expect, they're going to be aggressive cards. Like, this isn't going to be a lot of, Spectacle to set up the long game sort of thing. And what that means is that the cards that enable Spectacle are going to be working towards the same game plan as the Spectacle cards, which is always a nice bit of synergy. Because if you had a Spectacle card that was like draw 3 cards and gain 2 life or gain 3 life or something, that wouldn't work very well with your 1 mana 1/1 that pings. But all the Spectacle cards are lightning bolts, and your opponent, kill one of their creatures, or just an undercosted creature or what have you. And that means that Rakdos is going to be pretty straightforward, but that's just how it tends to be. There weren't very many different versions of Rakdos. Like the last 2 times we saw Rakdos, it was a beatdown deck, and that was basically what it was.
Yeah. And again, the interesting thing that I see here also, Luis, I want your take on this, is the reduced cost version of Spectacle cards. They could easily create like a snowball effect, right? Where if you can get the first Spectacle card down for cheaper than it's supposed to be, you're like ahead on mana, and then it makes it less likely for your opponent to be able to profitably block, which means that you're more likely to have Spectacle going forward. And then if you can power out another cheaper spectacle card, it's like you're so far ahead at that point that your opponent might not be able to recover.
Yeah, and I think that, depending on what the spectacle enablers are, that's going to be more and more true. Because one of the reasons not to do something like Goblin Fireslinger, the 1 mana 1 you're talking about, is that it made it too easy. Once you had that card in play, Bloodthirst was always on. I wouldn't expect to see exactly that, but imagine that you just played a 1-drop, just a crappy 1-drop, 1 mana 1 with like some trinket text. But that let you spectacle on turn 2 like a 3/3 or something. Then your spectacle's on for basically the rest of the game. And it's going to be so dramatically different when you don't have that 1-drop, which does make the deck a little inconsistent because when you're ahead, you do snowball. But much like Bloodthirst, when you're behind, your creatures either end up being underpowered or in this case, you just can't even cast them because they're more expensive.
Yeah. So it does seem to be. And I mean, that kind of fits the all in nature of black-red, right? Like it's not. Like, I think they kind of want you to commit to it. Like, there's that black color pie angle of like, commit and then the red, attacking. It's kind of a nice mix if they do that. Now, when it comes to the ones that have a different, so I have a common here for each, and this one's called Rafter Demon. It's 2 black-red for a 4/2 demon, and it has spectacle for 3 black-red. So it adds a mana to it. If Rafter Demon enters the battlefield, when it enters the battlefield, if its spectacle cost was paid, each opponent discards a card.
Yeah, so this is 4 mana 4/2 or 5 mana 4/2 they discard. This doesn't actually look like one of the better spectacle cards.
Yeah, this is like kind of a mediocre common, right? But I am curious, like what kind of effects we get, because this is obviously on color or whatever, like discarding a card is fine. But I'm wondering if we get more effects that help us pile on more damage. Right? With these,
we certainly will.
Okay. So that's the things that I would look out for, not as much the Rafter Demon end of the spectrum. But yeah. So again, the thing I'm going to be looking out for is how aggressive is this deck really? What are the cheap enablers to help me get spectacle going as early as possible? And then what are the choice versions of the more expensive spectacle cost cards, the ones that pay you off more? Because I agree with you. Rafter Demon is like, meh. So, okay. Should we move to Orzhov?
No, but we can go ahead and take a look at Orzhov, where we've got a Afterlife, which I don't think we're going to see very many Afterlife numbers that aren't 1, which is actually kind of funny. Like,
geez, Afterlife 2 seems like it'd be super strong.
Yeah. And actually, it's kind of funny that there even is a number on this mechanic, because I from what I've seen, it's all Afterlife 1 with a couple Afterlife 2s. I haven't seen an Afterlife 3 yet. And
maybe they're saving that for rares or something.
Yeah, because Afterlife is just really, really powerful. It puts a lot of pressure on your opponent to not trade off or not kill your creatures. It also makes exiling or luminous bonds type removal, like enchantments that pacify something, much, much more important. And then it makes sacrifice cards a lot better for people on the Orzhov side. So there's a lot going on here, even despite it being a pretty simple mechanic.
Yeah, the real question I have is, are we going to be incentivized to take advantage of this through these methods that you just said? Or am I just supposed to say, hey, kid, be happy that when your decent creature dies, it turns into a flyer and I just use it for value, right? It's 2 blockers. It's a card. It's an expendable creature that I don't mind putting into harm's way, because worst case scenario, I get a 1/1 flyer out of the deal. Look, I'm perfectly happy with that. But traditionally, these guilds have more synergistic stuff going on than that. Usually, maybe the sacrifice theme isn't just to get a 1/1 flyer, but it has more going on. Maybe there's mass pump spells for the little 1/1s, or something to do with tokens, or I don't know. I'm just wondering if they took a step further, or if I'm just supposed to be happy that my creature dies and there's still a creature there that's pretty good.
Yeah, I don't think you really need to do a whole lot. This doesn't look like a mechanic that lends itself to very focused deck building. We'll see what the cards do. If there's a lot of sacrifice cards, that changes things. But
yeah,
both Azorius and Orzhov so far, you just put these cards in your deck and they're going to be good.
Yeah,
Rakdos takes a little bit more planning and foresight, because you need the crappy 1/1s or the 2 mana 1/1 flyer type cards in order to make it so your spectacle cards work. Your Afterlife and your Addendum cards are just they're going to work. You just put the cards in your deck.
I feel like Riot fits that as well. I mean, you have a choice every time you cast it, but I think that most players are going to sort it out, and it's just good, right? It's just a thing that is good. Where when you look at Adapt, that is not the case. Like, I think Adapt is weird and kind of tricky, and I'm curious to see if just straight up adapting, which we'll get to in a minute, or actually we can just get to now, is just good. Right. Yes. Because it looks kind of just good to me. Like, I think people underestimate the power of a +1/+1 count, even just a single +1/+1 counter on a creature. But again, let's back up just a little bit. Adapt lets us one shot grow our creatures, right? We get to do whatever it is one time. And like I said, I just find that already pretty powerful. Even just one counter can make combat favorable for you, and 2 on almost any creature does. So Adapt 1 is already pretty good. Adapt 2 seems very strong. And the one that I have here as the example is called Aeromunculus. And it's 1 green-blue for a 2/3 flyer. It's common, and it has 2 blue-green Adapt 1. Like, that's good. Yeah, well, 2/3 flyer for 3 that can become a 3/4 flyer, like, at some point. That's dang good.
3 mana 2/3 flyer is a card I just put in my deck always, and then having the adaptability is gonna be quite the little upside. It's also less about the number on Adapt and also just the cost to adapt, because that's not consistent either. So Adapt 1 might not be big, but if there's a creature that's like 2 mana Adapt 1, that's really strong. Mm-hmm. Whereas 5 mana Adapt 2 is just okay.
Right. I look at this one, for example, too, and I'm curious to see how often, because this one curves into itself, right? It's 3 mana into 4 mana Adapt. And while you probably won't want to spend that 4 mana the next turn on adapting most of the time, you can. And, one of the things, by the way, that we should also mention here, this one's not a great example because it has flying, but threat of activation, right? We talk about it all the time on the podcast. I mean, if they have like a 3/3 with Adapt 2 or something, right? And you're just like, attack my 3/3 into your 3/3. They just can't block it because you just adapt it and kill it if they block. And so it's just like 3 free damage on a creature that would normally be a trade. That's powerful stuff too.
Yeah, just imagine that you just have you curve out with Adapt creatures and you were on the play. If you have enough mana to pay for the Adapt, your opponent's just not going to be able to block a lot of the time because they're going to be above curve, and then you're going to be able to just keep playing more creatures.
Right.
And it's going to be really tough to come back from this. One thing that is rough is 3 of these guilds have key, mechanics that look pretty aggressive. Spectacle, I think Adapt is going to end up being a pretty aggressive mechanic in terms of it really does pressure the combat step. And then once we get to Gruul, Riot, of course, is as well. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. And then the other thing I'm curious about for Simic and Adapt is can we take advantage of this beyond the simple, right? Beyond just I have a creature that can put a counter or a couple of counters on itself. That's already kind of cool. But boy, there's got to be a lot of neat stuff you can do by moving counters, by removing counters for some type of value. I feel like there's going to be games of limited one when you adapt for the second time, right? You adapted, you move the counter or cash it in or whatever, thing that they end up printing for this is. And then later on you get to adapt again. That is just a lot of mana used, over the course of a game. And there's got to be some powerful stuff that you can do if those counters aren't just stuck on the creature until it dies. And I can't imagine that they are.
Yeah.
So that'll be cool too. Gruul.
So we've got a, Riot here where basically the fact that a ton of Gruul cards, red and green, and of course multicolored cards can just have haste means the first thing I think of is when I'm playing against Gruul, I'm often going to be leaving creatures back on empty boards.
Seriously? It just sounds so scary, right?
Yeah. When you're at 4, you're just like, I guess I've got to leave this 3/3 back because what if they just have a Riot card?
Right, because there's so many, there's just not that many cards that have haste in the set, and in this case, every card with Riot can. I think you're going to feel very uneasy playing against Gruul.
Yeah, and it's also kind of interesting where if you leave a creature back so they can't get a good haste attack in, they just have then the option of playing Riot as a +1/+1 counter.
Ugh, that's nasty.
and ending up like, all right, you want to play it that way? I'll just play this as a bigger creature then.
Yeah, I love that. Usually when you have two choices like this on a creature, what you really want is for them to be very different choices, right? Two different things so that you can kind of always cover the base that you want. And they give you that with Riot. Like the chance to have haste, you'll know when you want haste, right? You'll be like, I'm way ahead. This creature can get through. I'm just going to keeping the pressure on, and that's how I'm going to win the game. Because in most scenarios, a +1/+1 counter is better than haste, right? But you'll know when that's not the case. But I would assume that many of the times you're just going to end up putting the counter on here. I'd say, more than you choose haste, if I had to guess. I think. Oh, by the way, we should read the card too. By the way.
Oh yeah, our common card here is Frenzied Erynx. This is 2 red-green for a 3/3 cat beast at common. It has Riot. It has Trample, and you can pay 4 red-green to give it +3/+0 until end of turn.
That's a common?
Yeah, I think this one already got spoiled at some point. But
these all did. I took them off of WotC's site. So
yeah, and this is 4 mana 4/4 or 4 mana 3/3 haste, and it has Trample, and you can pay 6 to just kind of fireball them out kind of at the end. This is a pretty nuts common.
Yes, this to me is. You and I were looking at the Raptor Demon and kind of going, but I'm looking at Frenzied Erynx and I'm like, ugh. Yeah. Like this thing is scary, man. 3/3 haste Trample is already like fine, and geez, a 4/4 with Trample for 4 mana is like that's pretty fine too. And as you mentioned, given that it has Trample, right, the pump ability could just kill you. You can't just throw one of your Afterlife tokens in front of Frenzied Erynx. You're just going to get ran over by the thing.
And 6 mana for +3/+0 doesn't actually look like a very good rate, but the fact is it's already on such a pushed card that it's just extra, an extra threat. When your opponent's at 5 or 6 and you're attacking with this, it limits what they can block with.
Yeah, this is probably going to be, at least in the first week of the set, a good example of why the vanilla test came to be, right? Which is, people would often downgrade cards in their head because it had an activated ability or something that didn't look very good, or it was too expensive or whatever, right? And you're like, hold on a second. Like, if I gave this, let's just say this thing was 2 green red for just a 4/4, right? It's like a vanilla 4/4. You'd be like, okay, I could probably put that in a deck. And then some people inevitably, if you put it had this activated ability, just gets +3/+0 for 6 mana, they would be like, that card's not that great. Like 6 mana is so much to activate it. And it's like, hello, it's on a 4/4. It's a card you already are fine with. You're just getting free rolled. It's a gravy ability. And this card's just dumb. I mean, this thing just has 2 relevant abilities and you're never really missing on the stats. So yeah, I think I'll probably end up dying to a Frenzied Erynx multiple times in the format for sure. Yeah. But to me, Riot actually seems like one of the strongest. It's, we talk about setup cost on the podcast here, right? That's the concept of a card needing help to be good. You need to do other things before the card actually gives you what you're trying to get out of it. And these Riot cards just don't care, right? They give it to you right now, either the counter or the haste, and they just stand alone. It's not like you need synergy for these cards. You just play them.
I think that despite the fact that it looks like it's, pushing an aggressive agenda, yeah, you can just put these cards in your deck and they'll just be good. And as you said before, having a +1/+1 counter is generally more powerful than haste. If you're not trying to attack them, then you just get to have your creatures be bigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I personally feel that, at least at face value, Riot is the most simple way to just get value. You're just it just doesn't ask really anything out of you. Even the Afterlife creatures have to die at some point for you to get that. The adapt creatures, you have to dump a bunch of mana into them later. For the Aeromunculus, you're 7 mana in before you get your 3/4 flyer, right? For Frenzied Erynx, it's just what do you want? You want to kill him now or you want to kill him later?
Well,
so
I like it is going to depend on rate. And, this Frenzied Erynx just has a really high rate, whereas the Rakdos card doesn't that you selected. But I think in general, yes.
I just assume that means that Rakdos sucks and Gruul's awesome. Right?
Yeah, that's how it works. But basically, yes, Riot doesn't take a lot of work, and it's just gonna depend a lot on what kind of cards have it. But I would expect Riot to end up being one of the more impactful mechanics.
When it comes to Azorius, the last guild, this one's a little hard for us to address here because, as we mentioned before, when we talked about Sphinx's Insight, the 2 white-blue instant draw 2 cards in Addendum, you gain 2 life. It just depends on every card. Like, I can't tell you, well, Riot looks good, and you say, well, let's take a look at the rate on the cards, which is completely correct. Here, it's like Addendum is an ability, but it is all about the rate on the cards. Like, that's all that really matters when it comes to Addendum is, well, what am I getting and what am I not getting if I cast it on their turn, and then, making that calculation in your head. So it's hard to really make predictions about Azorius from that perspective. From a big picture perspective, I mean, Azorius is usually controlling. It does have this kind of like tempo thing going on. Like, was it called Detain?
Detain was from Return to Ravnica. And
yeah, that was like a slow you down, not a
but even then, that wasn't really a beatdown deck.
True. I just always remember the
Liev Sky Knight.
Yeah, the Sky Knight. Yeah,
3 mana, 3/1 flying Detain.
Yep. And that was obviously a more of a tempo-based card. But here, we can expect that Azorius will be a controlling guild. That should just be your assumption going in. And if they do something different with it, then we'll figure it out. But until then, I will be assuming that. And then you're just going to have to read each and every Addendum card.
Yeah. So one other thing I wanted to take a look at was the guild overlaps. Because, right, when Guilds of Ravnica came out, it's like, oh, Surveil and Undergrowth, those work well together. Turns out Undergrowth was a bust, but that doesn't mean that those don't, in theory, work well together. I think that the overlap between Simic and Gruul is pretty good because Gruul gets a bunch of +1 counters, and Simic's going to have cards that cares about that. Like we've already seen cards that give you a bonus if the creature has a +1 counter, or cards that remove counters from a creature to do something cool. And so that's a good overlap. And both mechanics are also aggressive, which really helps. Orzhov and Azorius seem to overlap quite nicely as well because Orzhov has a lot of creatures that are good at blocking, and if Azorius wants to be a control deck, you can play your 2/2 Afterlife creature, and you can be very happy trading it off, or even getting 2 chump blocks out of it in order to set up your more powerful late game.
Yeah, the Imperious Oligarch, the one that we that we used here, the black-white 2/1 Vigilance Afterlife 1 at common. I mean, that buys you a lot of time.
Yeah. There's minor synergy between Orzhov and Rakdos, where the 1/1 spirits are good at getting spectacle if you end up with any of them.
Okay, sure.
And you have and you have cards with Afterlife that your opponent won't want to block. So if you're a 3-color, combination, you get to send in, or even if you're just Rakdos, but you have like black Spectre or Afterlife cards because the guilds have monocolor cards as well. Yeah, you can attack with your Afterlife creature. They're just not going to block it. Then you're going to spectacle them right out.
Yeah, that to me really appeals to if the more expensive spectacle cards are really, because like the Rafter Demon's a good example of like kind of a mid-range value card, right? Yeah. Like this thing is not an aggro card particularly at all. So like if you can, get some type of build where you're using the black cards from there to enable these type of cards, that makes a lot of sense. For the ones that get cheaper and are ostensibly more aggressive, well, that's less so, right? Because it's just hard to get a creature dead that quickly.
The overlap between Gruul and Rakdos seems kind of minor. Haste and Spectacle is not actually that good of a combination because if you're going to play a haste creature, you're often going to tap out, and then you're not going to have mana left to Spectacle, even if it does get through. Though getting +1 counters means maybe you get to hit it the next turn. So,
like if you have a red Riot creature or something,
yeah, or even I'm just looking at the 3-color combination because we did see various 3-color overlaps in the last set. Yeah. I would expect to see the same, especially on the more controlling side.
Yeah, and the guild gates are back too.
Yeah, so if you're looking at like Bant, you're looking at Azorius, Simic. Those don't seem like they have that much intrinsic overlap. In fact, it's kind of an anti-combo where if you want to leave mana up for Adapt or your instant, you're not getting the Addendum value. But that's not really the end of the world, I guess.
Are there any other combos that we need to hit?
I'm trying to look at. I think those are all the 3-color combinations that have overlaps here. And yeah, I think that some work better together than others, but we're also going to have to see how that ends up playing out based on just the card file.
Okay, so let's rank them. Let's rank the guilds based on their ability. because we don't, obviously we can't rank them based on how good they are yet because we don't know all the cards. After next week, we'll have a better idea. But just based on this, I would say something like Riot number 1, Adapt number 2, Addendum number 3. Maybe this is a little too low. Actually, I'll go Afterlife number 3, Addendum number 4, 3. and then Spectacle last, because Spectacle just seems so finicky.
Yep, but it's funny that Rakdos, Rakdos is like, I don't care about anything. I'm going to party. I'm going to do whatever I want. Pure chaos. Yeah. They have also the hardest to use mechanic, the most finicky.
Yeah, there's like some Orzhov person behind this, or sorry, there's some Azorius person behind the scenes going like, well, actually, you haven't done damage yet, so
you've not fulfilled the terms of your contract. You need to you signed here, and you need to fill this out.
It's supposed to be this frenzy blood party or whatever. That is really funny. I didn't think of that. Yeah. But I mean, look, some of them might just be really simple. And, again, we're going to be keeping a very close eye out for cheap, common enablers on the set review next week. And because if you can get Spectacle and you can build a Spectacle deck, then, that might be a thing. And by the way, that is another way to look at these mechanics, right? Are the ones that will be working well together sort of inherently, or the ones that won't? Like Spectacle, I would expect that you would like to see a Spectacle deck, right? That you're not necessarily just throwing in random Spectacle cards and hoping that they get there. Now, some of them will have a high enough floor that you're fine with that. But, if you look back at the similar mechanics, they wanted you to go all in. They wanted you to like enable them and then try to get as much Spectacle going as you could for that one. Where you look at Afterlife and I don't know. Is there going to be something to tie these together? Same thing with Adapt. Is there going to be stuff to tie these together or not? And these ones and Addendum pretty clearly doesn't. I don't think that there's going to be cards that reference Addendum, right? There's not going to be like if you cast a spell with Addendum. Like I don't think that's going to be.
No, but there's there's information campaign. So disinformation campaign. The Azorius version is 1 white blue enchantment. When it comes into play, draw a card and gain 2 life. And whenever you cast instant on your main phase, return it to your hand.
Oh, so it does actually I mean, not literally, but that is referencing it. Oh, well, maybe I'm wrong then. All right. So maybe the mechanic is just casting instants on your main phase. Although, man, maybe the truth isn't real anymore. Like that sounds not nearly as good.
Oh, no. Just like in the real world, information is less powerful than disinformation.
Wow, we've learned so much. Before we go, by the way, Luis, we've got our preview card.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't mention that at the top of the show, but we've got our exclusive limited resources preview card. Thank you, Wizards, for this preview that we get. And it's actually a really strong card, I think. I think it's kind of the Gruul stopper. It's called Pitiless Pontiff, and it is black-white it's a Orzhov uncommon, and it is a 2/2 vampire cleric, and it has the activated ability. You can pay 1 mana and sacrifice another creature, and Pitiless Pontiff gains Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn.
Woo! This card is not weak. It's 2 mana 2/2 with significant upside because not only does it give you a sack outlet if you want to cash in some of your Afterlife creatures, like maybe they are trying to exile or enchant one of your Afterlife creatures, or you just need to get some flyers out of your ground creatures. It also becomes a Death Touch Indestructible, which just eats a creature on defense.
Which is, and repeatedly, right?
Because it sticks around afterwards. You also, if you're the aggressor, you can just start attacking with this, and they have to basically not chump it exactly because you do need to sacrifice a creature, but presumably these Orzhov decks have a lot of fodder to sacrifice.
Right. This to me just seems like one of the best blockers you could ever have in a deck like this. Right. You mentioned the fodder. Not only is it just like expendable creatures, but if they have Afterlife, you get to do it twice. I mean, they could make an 8/8, and you have your Pitiless Pontiff, and you're just like, come at me, bro. Like, you can't attack into it. I can sacrifice whatever my worst creature is and just eat your 8/8, right? It's like, I have a feeling that this thing is going to be a major issue for the Gruul and for the Simic decks. Like the green base decks are just going to look at this thing and just go, I don't have any way to deal with this. Like, right? Like blue and green, especially green red. Like how they always deal damage. So indestructible stops basically all of the ways that they have, and it stops combat.
Well, you do have to keep mana up, and sacking creatures is definitely not free, so you could run out of creatures. But yeah, this card's going to be quite strong.
Yeah, just lets you sort of exchange resources on the ground in a really good way. And also, do you think that this card could have any constructed implications?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that we saw cards like this do pretty well last time, when Return to Ravnica goes around. The fact that it costs a mana to activate does limit it quite a bit.
Okay. Well, good stuff. This set, as you know, it reminds me of Guilds of Ravnica, right? It in many ways is kind of running that back, but just with the other guilds. But it has a lot of the same similarities with, the split cards and the uncommons and the gates and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to be able to kind of slide right into this one and just start figuring out which guilds are good and which ones aren't and what combinations we can do pretty quickly. This would be a set that would take, I think, quite a while to kind of adapt to. But now, like, given that we're coming off of another 5 guild set, I think it's going to be not that hard at all.
Yeah, and I think that this is looking a little, fairly similar to Guilds of Ravnica in terms of how I expect the draft structure to be, because they're both the same structure. But the mechanics and the strengths of the guilds, lot to determine there, because that will really impact what is good to draft and what is not. It also could even be 3 colors is more popular than in Guilds of Ravnica, or it could be that you're always 2 color. We just don't know yet.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked earlier in the show about, well, which guild should you pick? And we both kind of agreed, don't sweat it that hard. Pick the one that you like. Which one do you like?
I think that I'm going to enjoy playing Orzhov the most. But Simic is also looking pretty fun.
Yeah, I want to play Simic, or I want to try. I know it doesn't have quite as much of an identity because Addendum's a little bit looser of a thing, but I do want to try Azorius as well. I usually enjoy playing those ones, so hopefully I get one of those at the pre-release. If you want to watch that, by the way, if you're catching this show early enough, it's going to be on Friday, which is the day after this show goes up. But it's on twitch.tv/loading ready. Shoot, is it on their live or their run channel? You just go to loading ready run and it'll take you there. But they also have loading ready live, which is a different Twitch channel. But anyway, I'll be on that. I'll be tweeting about it too. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see when I tweet out. And it's kind of sweet, Louis. I get to play the set the week before the pre-release comes out, so I'll have kind of a leg up on getting my hands on the cards too, which is kind of sweet. Like for the
sounds
show.
Like an unfair advantage to me.
Yeah, I think so. Watch out, other podcasts. We got the early scoops. But yeah, you can come hang out and get my initial take as well as other people on there as well. Luis, let's call it a show, buddy. We've got a big one next week. And
we're conserving our energy for the fact that we've got 6 hours of show next week.
Exactly. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and he is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And I want to mention our sponsor one more time, channelfireball.com. Look, you want to get ahead of the game here. You can pre-order singles sealed product for Ravnica Allegiance right now. You can just go to Channel Fireball, put that order in. You don't have to think about it. You know exactly what you're getting. You know exactly how much it's going to cost. And you know that Channel Fireball is going to get it to you as quickly as they can. Once they're able to ship it, they will do so. So channelfireball.com for your for your Ravnica Allegiance pre-order needs. Otherwise, next week, set review, commons and uncommons. Luis and I are going to sit down and we're going to go over every single one of them. We're going to get into the nitty gritty on this set and get you ready for your pre-release. We hope to see you there.
Hey, I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, that was actually me coming right back. I wasn't just leaving.
How long until I would have recognized that you just left?
That would be pretty good. That would be second only to the sign off where I announced that I'm resigning.
It also would have been really bad because you're the one that has to stop the recording this week because you're holding the keys to the car and it just would have recorded forever. So
I had an idea for a new way to help people get better at Limited.
Oh, okay. What do you got?
Well, we're training our new dog. She's about a year old, and she's pretty
Julie?
Julie, yeah.
Quite cute dog.
Yeah, quite untrained though. In fact, wasn't even housebroken. The original owners, they were well-meaning but extremely clueless. So one of the methods you can use to train dogs is a clicker. And when she does something good, we click. And that...
Well, this is a way to reward her or to show her something's good.
Right. So...
Okay.
1 second.
What is that?
Looks like I woke someone up. I'll be right back.
The clicker worked.
Yeah. So we have a clicker, like I said. And what it's trying to do is reinforce the behavior of, she went poop outside or came when called or sat or whatever. So I was thinking, what if you got someone like, for example, someone signed up for your intensive training course, you watch them draft, and they they take 2 good white cards and they third pick a mediocre white card over a great blue card, and you're just like, I guess
this is intense draft training.
Yeah, I guess that would be aversion training. I'm trying to think. So I guess it would actually be better if you got it when they did something wrong. So in this particular case, it would be like someone switches to the open guild, and you're just like, yeah, and you're able to do that until they associate that.
I just picture you sitting behind some hapless drafter and you're just clicking away at them or whatever. Although I have to say, I think getting clicked at is aversion.
Yeah, for humans, I think they actually dislike it. So my first example is even better. You're sitting behind them and they lose a game and they start complaining about getting mana screwed, and you're just like click, click, click until they stop. I feel like that would be pretty effective. Like, you're watching someone play. You're hired to be their draft coach, their life coach, and then I guess it could even extend to outside of Magic. You just have someone around there clicking every time you do something bad. You just stop doing bad things, right?
This is one of your worst ideas, easily.
Oh man,
nobody's paying you for this.
I would love it. It would be so fun though. Like we're sitting there, and you're just like, you press snooze on your alarm again. And they're just like, sorry, click,
I feel like you should bring the clicker to your next Pro Tour testing house and pick a victim.
I did that once. I downloaded.
You already did
Well, not
that?
with a clicker, but like I downloaded a Vuvuzuela app. This is right after the World Cup where those things.
Oh, that obnoxious.
They got banned in a bunch of stadiums, but there's an app that played the sound, and people got pretty mad at me pretty quickly. In any case, we're straying from my great idea of using a clicker to train humans to not do bad behaviors. But we'll save that for our next money-making idea, I suppose. Oh, no, sorry, that's not the outro.
It has an outro button.
And that'll do it for this week's Limited Resources.
Ugh.